Thank you, and good afternoon, and how are you enjoying the festival? It has just truly wonderful, and going from place to place, and all the ages and people and everything, it's just wonderful. So I just wanted to, actually, I'm butting in and taking this opportunity to come and just thank you and say hello to all of the fiction stage writers and the fans of the writers. It's a real treat, and for me, because I've already heard recently from today's author and next author, Miss Barbara Kingsolver. And she's one of the most engaging and consistently relevant fiction writers. And I just want to put a plug in for, are you going to do question and answer? Yes. Please, someone ask her about poetry. That's all I'm going to say. Please. So please welcome with NPR's wonderful Madeline Del Barrio. Del Barco. I got the Margarito, who will be interviewing her, and you're in for a treat. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This is a packed house. Wow. And I saw the line for the book signing too. It was like, phew.
I had a dash. I got some exercise.
Oh, right.
Ran from the basement to here.
Well, thank you. Thank you to everybody for being here. And I'm so thrilled to do this today and to meet you finally.
Yeah.
I thought we would have met before.
You would think.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. But because you're here, I assume that you all know how incredible an author Barbara Kingsolver is. And you may have read her books, the Poisonwood Bible. Yeah. Or the bean trees. Or maybe one of the other dozen or more than a dozen books that you read. My favorite is Lacuna. And I just, isn't that fabulous? Yeah, I loved reading your account of Frida Kahlo. That was so fun. Today, though, we're going to talk about your latest novel, Unsheltered, which is actually set in New Jersey, half of it during the age of President Donald Trump. So
almost pre,
but just
pre. Yeah.
Very prescient.
We can call it set in the modern era.
I mean, I think 2016, right?
Yeah. The book came out in 2017, so I was writing it for the 4 years previous to that.
Yeah, interesting. Mm-hmm. So, and you might know that Barbara Kingsolver grew up in rural Kentucky. Mm-hmm. As a child, she and her family lived in the Congo. Her dad was a doctor. She plays the piano, and she knows quite a bit about biology, having studied at DePauw University, having worked for a medical school as a lab technician, and having taught the subject, including theoretical population genetics. She's worked on archaeological digs in Europe. She's traveled to Africa, Australia, Latin America for long stints. Mm-hmm. Am I getting this all right?
Yes.
She has lived in Arizona. She was a single mom, like I am. She has been an activist, and she was a journalist, like I am. She and her husband fixed up their bungalow in Tucson, is that right? Mm-hmm. And live in their 100-year-old farmhouse in Virginia. And many of these details explain some of the details of her latest book, Unsheltered. The novel.
You're suggesting I have experience with falling down houses.
Well, that is one of my questions.
Nothing gets lost in your life. You can always use it.
Right. Well, in this book, I'm going to explain, in case you haven't read this, but I encourage you to read it. Actually, how many people have read this book? Quite a lot, yeah. So this novel, I just want to explain to them in case, just so you have a background. This novel goes back and forth in alternate chapters set in two different time periods, one just after the Civil War in 1871 and the other in 2016. And both stories are set in the little town of Vineland, New Jersey. So back in the day, college professor Thatcher Greenwood. He's forbidden to talk about the works of Charles Darwin, but he also befriends a woman scientist named Mary Treat. The town was founded as a sort of non-alcoholic utopia by Charles Landis.
Oxymoron, you might think, but
man who challenged the theory of evolution and other scientific theories, and Landis is challenged by a newspaper man who's something of a renegade. So then you fast forward a few years, just before Donald Trump becomes president, though his name is never in this book. But
I didn't want to get those tweets.
Yeah. Yes, but we all know who you're talking about. In this book, Willa Knox, there's a former journalist, and her husband, who's a college professor, they find themselves down on their luck, living in a house that she inherits, the same house that Thatcher Greenwood, way back then, once lived in, and it is literally falling apart. It's in shambles, and they live with his father and their daughter and their baby grandson, and all of them are such fascinating characters. I would like to ask you, what inspired you to write this novel in the first place?
Well, as you say, as we established, I started writing this in about 2013, 2014, and I was kind of casting around for my next subject, and it seemed like my next subject was like, what the heck? Is this the end of the world as we know it? And this was 5 years ago and more. It just seemed very clear to me that suddenly a whole lot of things that we've always counted on as being true, just these truths that we hold to be self-evident, were no longer true. The rules just didn't seem to hold anymore. Things like civil governance, that there will always be, a pension at the end of a job at the end of a college degree. All of these, we always have learned that if we follow the rules and do the right things, it will be okay, and our politicians will behave, in a civil way, and that the ice on the poles will stay frozen, and that there will always be more fish in the sea, and all of a sudden, none of that was true. And that seemed like a big subject, and a worthy one, because the domain of a novel is really not current events. That's your job. The domain of a novel is the territory of the human psyche. And so I wanted to write about how we behave. What do we do in times like these, and why? And why is it that people can go very different directions, either kind of reaching for solutions or kind of going into the pumpkin shell and sort of hunkering down on what they already know and insisting that the world is going to be like it used to be. So I thought it would be interesting to find some other time in history where that was another WTF era, and I settled on just after the Civil War, when this country was wrecked, really split apart. It was polarized along very much the same lines that it's polarized now, for many of the same reasons, in fact, if you really kind of, if you examine it. And then into that world sail these two books by Charles Darwin, which really undermined the very idea of what it means to be human, and the rules, the most important rule everybody had counted on, which is that God put us here to control the earth, not that we are part of the earth that has its own rules that control us. That it's hard to, I know there are people who are still debating this stuff, but it's hard for us now to imagine how scary that was when it really was a new idea. Right. That the natural laws apply to us too. So I thought it would be interesting to create a set of characters in that era and one in this era dealing with all of the problems that I just enumerated. and put them in the same house and have the house falling down, and just see if I could find these common denominators of the psyche about sort of what we do, like sort of what drives us to do the things we do, right or wrong, in these hard times. So that's how I started, and I wanted to find some real characters who were engaged in the Darwinian debate. And I, just by luck, I found one that nobody had ever heard of, which is Mary Treat. Mary Treat was this 19th century naturalist. She was self-taught, as you had to be. You know, if you were a woman, you weren't allowed to go to college. She trained herself. She studied plants, insects. She did all these experiments, and she had the moxie to just write to all the important scientists of the day, including Charles Darwin, and they wrote back. And she had this. She left a legacy of writings, natural history, scientific publications, and also popular ones. She wrote for like the Atlantic Monthly and Harper's. Imagine if you could write about, you know, caterpillars for the Atlantic Monthly. But back then, you know, people were interested in caterpillars. So anyway, so I found her, and there was very little known about her. I could only work out that she had lived in Vineland, New Jersey. So I called up the Historical Society and said, have you heard of this Mary Treat? And there was sort of like, the phone dropped. You know, I could hear the sound of a stunned librarian who said, "You won't believe what we've got. Come and look." And so I did, wow. And I found these very deep archives. Mary Treat died without children, so she left everything to the Historical Society. So I found not only this very rich, interesting character, but also this whole cast of characters, including, well, she had an interesting life. Her husband ran off chased after a suffragette who believed in free love, and she was like, "Go on with you know, more room for my experiments." That's just kind of the ideal situation for a 19th century woman, to have a husband who's just, you know, gone. So she could do her stuff, and she was very interesting. I got her personality from her letters and her writings and stuff. But also, I had no idea that this town of Vineland, founded, as you say, as a temperate utopia, was founded by this character, Charles Landis, who was this megalomaniac who found ways to use immigrants to do all his hard work while at the same time reviling him. He owned hotels. He broke all his own rules. He had this odd flop of hair. I'm not making this up. I couldn't make this up. And he ran this community in a way that, like, he made laws that put money into the pockets of all of his friends, and I just thought, this is too good. And then I got to the part where Charles Landis actually shot somebody on Main Street and got away with it. So,
yep.
So I had to write this book.
History.
And so, yes, yeah, like that could never happen again. And I will remind you, this was all in the winter before. I was writing this in the 2 years before the election. So I was just watching this strange new way of being come up on the horizon, and watching how people played into it, and comparing that with how people chose to follow or not follow Charles Landis. It just opened the door for a really interesting plot. It just really explored all the themes I wanted. So the fun of the novel, the craft of the novel, was to take these two stories and interleave them so that chapter by chapter, you know, the chapters kind of hook into each other through language, through conversations, through plot. And then before you know it, instead of reading two stories, you're reading one story. So
fascinating. And I'm sure that you went to the same Vineland what is it, the Historical Society?
Antiquariat Society. This is how self-consciously Charles Landis founded Vineland. The first building he built, after he laid out all the streets, named them for himself, then he built a historical society so that the newspaper, which he wrote and edited and published, could go into the historical society from issue number 1. So, he was very, like a lot of mirrors around this guy. So it was great for me as a researcher because I had everything. I had the full record of this place, which now has become, ideally for my novel, kind of really run down and, economically stagnant and all of the problems that, that we now have. So, so then I just had to walk around and kind of get the vibe of modern day Vineland and figure out how to put it all together.
Yeah, I looked on Google Maps and found Vineland and tried to find this house, which you made it up, of course. It's a parking lot, right, next to a...
You are correct.
Next to a lawyer's office.
Yeah, that's right. And I purposely chose an address that was a parking lot because, think about it, this is not a kindness to put somebody's real house in. So I always do it. In Lacuna, I did the same thing. I put, to jump to another novel, I put Harrison Shepard's house on a street in Asheville that's in between like a parking lot and the Chamber of Commerce, so that there's, so it's not a real house there.
Nobody can complain.
Won't, so we won't get literary tourism or whatever. Heaven forbid.
Well, I wonder though if people are going to Vineland to look up the research that you did and look for the house and
maybe.
Anybody live in Vineland?
I actually did. I've heard from people in Vineland. I did when I was on book tour. I did I guess the closest is I did an event in Philadelphia, and this whole crew of Vinelanders came, and
wow.
They were, moderately pleased. Although they said you were not very nice to our founder, Charles Landis.
Oh.
And I said, well, he kind of did that to himself.
Right.
And recorded it. So, but it is funny how even infamy has its own kind of
And they're
appeal.
still supporting Charles Landis.
They have a Charles Landis Day every year where people dress up and
do they shoot somebody on
maybe they shoot Fury Cruz. I don't know. But it's interesting. But no, I never imagined that I would write a novel set in New Jersey. Nothing against New Jersey. It just wasn't my place. But that once, this is how I write novels. I first think about what I want to write about, kind of the ideas, the themes, and then I construct a plot, and then I try to find the place where that belongs. And this novel had to be in Vineland. It had to be. So. And
it's amazing because if you wrote it in 2013, 14?
Finished in, it came out in a year ago, so I finished it at the end of 2017.
Finished writing it.
Right,
So
correct.
this was before Trump even...
Yeah. Yes, before he
before he announced that he was
people,
running.
Yes, when people, he had announced, but people were still saying, Trump. Yeah.
In fact, I would love for you to read this passage because it really, it's pretty amazing. You have, can you indulge us here?
Of course.
Yes, thank you. Here you go.
All right. So in the modern era, the family is. Willa Knox is the kind of the mother of this family, and she has this daughter, Tig. She has 2 millennial kids. One of them did everything right, and he's still unemployed. The other one, Tig, is she's one of those kids who we would say what my mother always said about me, which is if you threw her in the water, she would float upstream. That's Tig. She just is driving her mother and father crazy. She's living, of course, back home because she doesn't have a job either. But she's just so oppositional and irritating. And annoying, and the only person in the family that she really gets along with is the crotchety old, really foul-mouthed Republican grandpa. Papu. They're a Greek family, so they call him Papu. So, okay, where is the? Okay, yeah, here we are. So she's talking. So Willa sees that Papu he's just got his TV on Fox News all the time, and he's just loving this guy, this new guy that everybody's talking about. And she says, I don't get it. You know, why does he like this guy? She says, I sure don't get it. Papu loves this billionaire running for president who's never lifted a finger doing anything Nick would call work. Why that guy? Tig says, because rich white guys are supposed to be running the world. Papu thinks this dude must have put in the time and gamed the system to get his billions, because that's how it works in America. So it's his turn to be president. What Papu can't stand is getting pushed out of the way by people he doesn't even think should be voting, never mind getting jobs or benefits or whatever. Willis says, never mind the White House. Definitely that, Tig says. He thinks those people are cutting into the line ahead of him. How can black and brown people get to have nice stuff and be in charge of things? Or women, God forbid, when Papu didn't get his turn yet. Tig was studying the laptop screen as she spoke with a wide-eyed, eyebrows up concentration face that Yano claimed was exactly like Willa's. They're trying to figure out how to get the family on Medicaid. Willa couldn't see it, but of course you never really saw yourself. This particular brand of tyrant, though, yikes, Willa said. I can't take him seriously. He's gonna burn out before the first primary.
Actually, the next paragraph, too.
Oh.
Can we do the next one?
Oh, okay.
Sorry, there's
Where is it?
248.
Okay,
Sorry.
and Tig says, and you know, Tig of course is like as horrified by all this as everybody else, but A, she gets it, she understands why Papu likes the guy, and B, she later points out Papu's gonna die pretty soon. He's really not in charge of anything. Okay, so Willis says he's gonna burn out before the first primary. Tig says, don't count on it. There's a lot of white folks out there hanging on to their God-given right to look down on some other class of people. They feel it slipping away and they're scared. This guy says he's bringing back yesterday, even if he has to use brass knuckles to do it and drag women back to the cave by their hair. He's a bully, everybody knows that, but he's their bully. Yeah. So, yeah, at the time,
That's great.
It's interesting. That's not really a typical passage of this book, but it's a conversation that I wrote, mind you, when I really couldn't imagine this bully was going to do anything but burn out. And I thought at times, well, if he goes away completely, you know, that'll be, you know, bad for the book, but good for the world. So things kind of went the other way.
Yeah, but kind of amazing that you wrote that before all of what we've seen. Anyway, I don't want to editorialize here, but very prescient. But you know, I actually, in the book, I really identified with Tig, Antigone, when she talks about, she does a lot of recycling, and she talks about, you know, saving the earth kind of thing. And when she describes a perfect date that she had in Cuba, and I just love this passage because she's talking about, well, tell us what, I mean, it is so great. Her perfect date is going to this restaurant where they use this 100-year-old china.
Yeah, everything is, well, Tig has spent some time in Cuba, and she's just come some years, actually, and the family didn't even know where she was, and so then she's kind of washed up at home again, and she doesn't really talk very much at all with her mother about, or her family about her time in Cuba. It's a mystery, and it's only, and there's just a lot of conflict between the mother and daughter in the book. I mean, novels are made of relationships, and it's really, you know, I kind of hate to pick out just a passage that's about, you know, the unsayable man who lives down the road. But because the novel's really about families and multi-generational, sort of how families figure out how to love each other and how to forgive each other, and how sometimes we learn from people younger than we are in spite of ourselves. I think that I think of this novel as my love letter to millennials, because I have 2 millennial kids, and I'm really tired of hearing people blame the millennials for everything. I mean, they've ruined dating, and they've ruined, conversation, and they've ruined, I don't know what, avocados. I mean, give me a break. Look what we've ruined and are leaving them. So it was really important to me to create this multi-generational family and have these conversations across the generations, to sort of suggest that those of us who are older would be well to remember that as Tig points out, the people running things right now formed their notion of this nation, this world, the resources that we have available and the way we should use them and the way we are able to use them and so forth. How to run the world. They formed their idea of that in the 1950s and 60s. It was a different world. All of those rules don't apply anymore. So tomorrow's problems are not going to be solved by yesterday's people. But that's a hard thing to just declare, to anyone. None of us wants to feel obsolete. So I wanted to write a lot about these conversations that have in families. So I guess I didn't really get to Cuba, but anyway, Tig surprised her mother by finally revealing some of the things that happened in Cuba, and some of the things she learned, and some of the things she loved, and that she actually also had an enormous heartbreak. And I don't want to, since only like half of you haven't read the book, I don't want to have any spoilers, but it was important for me as the author to love every person in this book, even crotchety old foul-mouthed Papu, who's like this. He's so profane. When my husband is my first reader, and when I wrote a couple of chapters and gave to him, and he read this extremely profane character rumbling, he said, Barbara, this one is not going to get adopted in the high school curriculum.
Although
okay.
all those, the younger siblings of the millennials might appreciate it too, to read
Well, that doesn't mean they can't read it. It's just their English teacher probably won't. The English teacher and parents won't want them to read it.
Right.
But anyhow, and likewise, but I had to love all these characters because they have to be represented honestly and fully. And I live in Virginia, but it's as far from here as you can get and still be in Virginia. I live in Appalachian, Virginia. I live among the people who are not helping to make this a blue state, or the purple. I live on the purpler end of things down there, and not entirely. I have many progressive friends as well, but I also understand my neighbors, and I understand their fear of being obsolete, of being replaced, of sort of having worked hard and the feeling that it's their turn now and they're being passed up. All of those things I wanted to sort of translate into a character that would ultimately, maybe merit some of your sympathy. I think that it's a book about the conversations that we're not having, and we're not going to get anywhere until we do.
Yeah, so one of the things that Tig tells her mother is, she says, the secret of happiness is low expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah. But to live, not so freely with the, wasting things and
Well, fundamentally, this growth, it's just baked into us. So many of us have just lived our whole lives on the assumption that the definition of a good life is having more, and and the definition of a good economy is growth, and that consumption and growth are what make the world better. All of the laws of our production and our economy are sort of based on that, simply that. So she's coming up, younger, and she's watched this whole thing, and she's watching the world run out of stuff, and it seems quite clear to her in a way that I think it's very hard for it to be clear to older people, that you can't grow forever. There are limits. So anyway, and we haven't even talked about the 19th century characters.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about too.
Okay.
Because in 1871, I guess it's that, right? There's references to fake news and science deniers back then.
There was a lot of that going on.
Yeah, and there's the one part where the character Thatcher Greenwood, he debates Darwin's theory of evolution, and it really reminds me of the Scopes monkey trial,
But it was 30 years before that.
Yeah, so it's like, how was that going on all over the place, or just like?
It really was. There were people who were making the the global concert tour of like how wrong Darwin is. Poor Darwin. He was just this sweet old guy who observed the world very closely, and after about 35 years of observing the world very closely, he wrote a couple of books. And I'm sure, he put them into the world saying, this is just so simple, people. If you look closely, this is the unifying principle that makes all of the world, all of the natural world make sense. This is the unifying principle that we have waited so long to find. I'm sure he was thinking, they're gonna love this. And they really didn't. He got a lot of hate mail. Yeah. So yes, people were very invested in Darwin, denial of Darwin's principles of natural selection and change through time, and people burned Darwin in effigy on the public squares. They were so threatened by the notion that just fundamentally that we're not in charge, that there are laws that we can't control.
Natural laws.
Yeah, natural laws. And we're still struggling with that one. You put enough carbon up there, it's going to heat things up, whether you like it or not. It's pretty, yeah, so it was interesting to me to see the parallels, and basically to see how fear makes us run for shelter, and to write about just that idea of being sheltered, that in both senses, that shelter is being sheltered means being naive, being sort of closed off from the truth, from the world, but without shelter also we feel like we're going to die.
And you say repeatedly in the book, you say, without shelter, we stand in daylight.
Yeah, that's what Mary Treat says.
Right.
And she and Thatcher become good friends because she's the only person he can talk with about what his passion for biology, and the next door neighbor, she'll listen. And they have this argument because he's going to lose his job, if he talks about evolution. And she's like, well, okay, but it's true. She's one of those people, those rare, I think she really was one of those really rare people who doesn't worry what people think of her. She just does what she's supposed to do. Okay, it's 10 minutes. That's like how much time we have total left. Okay.
Oh, okay. Well,
we're just having so much fun up here. We would love to, pardon me? Okay. Okay.
Oh,
Oh, well, good. We got free time.
Oh,
Yay.
wow.
But I would love to,
Yeah,
to
why don't
take
we hear
questions from the
yeah,
audience.
Why don't we do that? Do we have people set up for, I think there's 2 microphones.
Okay, and
One in each aisle?
yes, and before you ask your question, I'm gonna, the best intro I ever got to a Q&A session was, my moderator said, before you ask your question, ask yourself, what is a question?
I'll have to remember that one. That's a good one.
So yes. Okay, I think you're,
All right,
yeah.
hello?
Yes.
Sorry, she told me to go.
Got you.
All right. So I just, you had mentioned earlier that when you came up with the concept for this book, you felt like all the rules, everything was changing, and the things that we were told, the rules that we were supposed to follow and the patterns we were supposed to follow just didn't apply anymore. And I myself, I'm trying to break into the business of being an author, and I feel that resonated with me so much with self-publishing and the whole idea that, you know, you get an agent and then you get a publisher and then you make money just doesn't really seem to be fitting.
Right.
So I was just curious what you thought about that, what you think about the way that the publishing industry and the industry of being an author is changing.
That's an interesting question. I'm probably not I'm not an expert because I'm very lucky. I have the same, I mean, I've had the same publisher since the beginning. I have an agent, I have a publisher. It's all, for me, I just write the books and all of that takes care of itself. There are many different ways now that people can, many more platforms that people have from, you know, everything from, you know, the self-published book to the blog to the Twitter account to so on and so forth. I think there are some units of information that people seem to gravitate toward no matter what. And one of them is the novel. I have a great belief in the durability of the novel because it was invented, you know, I mean, in the Western world 400 and some odd years ago, and it has really stayed about the same during all that time. Whether it was published on sheepskin, or whether it was, you know, published on paper, or whether now it's, you know, read on your tablet. This form, this length of like a long story that has a set of plausible characters who work out a big thing. People seem to like that. You know, decade after decade, century after century, the novel has persisted. So I think that novels will stick around. There's something about that form people really like. You all like novels, right? Yeah. Yes. And there are many other things that you can read, shorter things, you know, flashier things with, you know, video parts, but still they come back to the novel. And what I think it does for us uniquely, I'm not exactly, but sort of answering your question. What a novel does for us that nothing else can do is that it takes us inside another person's brain. Think about that. Like, you can read the news, you can watch a movie, you're looking at information. When you pick up a novel, you're putting your life down on the nightstand, you're going inside these other people's brains. The narrator of this novel is you, and so you have that person's children, and you have that person's worries. You live another life. That's a profound act of empathy. And there's something about us, you know, the human animal, that wants that craves it. I mean, not everybody reads novels, I hear. But a lot of us do, and a lot of us keep coming back to that form. So I think that however they're published, and I think that I appreciate having editors and publishers and sort of a set of arbiters who will kind of winnow out the, you know, the chaff, and so that I can rely on a certain kind of, you know, set of standards that has brought a novel to me, and then, you know, the people who do the service of of reviewing them and all. But I believe in the novel. I write other things, but when I write a novel, I feel like just, regardless of the subject, just giving people the opportunity to enter other lives and see the world through other eyes, I feel like that's a political act. And I appreciate all of you for doing your part of that, because it's a partnership. The work of art is half done when I write it, and you do the other half when you read it and you make it your own.
Thank you so much.
Get somebody on that side here? Maybe.
Yes.
Hi, I'm one of those millennials that grew up reading your book, so thank you for saying nice things about millennials.
Thanks. You're welcome.
I remember first learning about the concept of refugees through reading The Bean Trees. I'm wondering, with that in mind, if you've had an eye to what's going on the southern border today, and if you plan to address any of that in future, or anything that comes up.
I think that there's so many immigrant stories suddenly all around us from every border. I lived in Tucson, Arizona, so I was on the Mexican border for 20 years. And so I really grew up there. I grew up in Kentucky. I moved to Arizona, southern Arizona, as a rather naive person, and I received an education in, another America, I would say. And I wrote a book of poetry called Another America. And I'm still, I still have friends there. I pay attention to that border. I have strong feelings about that desert and the people who are still working in the sanctuary movement to help save lives of the people who die crossing that desert. But in terms of my own work, I don't know what novel I'll write next, but I do find that immigrant stories of every kind are emerging so vividly, because we're a nation of immigrants, and it's so moving to be in this city, to see the beautiful constructions of people who made a country on the basis of ideas. Well, I'll just say, for example, last night I was in the Jefferson building of the Library of Congress. There was a gala for us authors there, and I was looking at that ceiling, which is it's the Sistine Chapel over there. It's amazingly beautiful, and we were all looking at each other and saying, they built this for books. And they built these libraries and these buildings for not just books, but for ideas, an idea of a nation that could make itself free, could have a constitution that would allow itself to become year by year a more perfect union, by becoming more inclusive, by giving, for example, 100 years ago, right about this month, women the right to vote, by making all of our citizens fully free. This is what we are, and that's not going to get erased in a handful of years. That can't. It's this is an inspiring city to visit. It's I know that people come and go. They move in, they move out. But what made the city is what makes this country great. And I think that reading books and those acts of empathy that I earlier mentioned, the capacity we have to imagine other lives and hold them as equal and valuable to our own, that's what makes us who we are. That's America. So thanks. Somebody has to tell me, are we out of time? Wrap it up.
Do we have time for one more,
Do we have
or
time
not?
for one question or not?
Okay, one
I
more.
have 1.5 questions. So the first question is, did you make up or actually research the many creative Greek swear words and curses in Unsheltered? And the second question is about your first book, Holding the Line. And I just literally stumbled on it in the nonfiction section of the library, an old beat-up copy, and loved it. And I wonder if you'd thought about revisiting those people or those stories in fiction or not. It seemed, again, so relevant today.
Well, thank you. My first book, I didn't hear completely all the question, but my first book, believe it or not, was a nonfiction book. It was about women who held together a mine strike in southern Arizona. I was a cub reporter, and I kept going out to cover the strike, and I kept going back and talking to these women until they started calling me that gal that's writing the book about us. So I thought, oh, I guess I have to do that. And then, of course, nobody wanted to buy it. But then after I wrote really nobody. But then I wrote a novel, and that went pretty well. And then that book was published second, but I wrote it first. Yes, of course, I always think about those people. I always think about the things I've written in the past, and I wonder, where those people are, the living ones and even the ones I made up. Like, where's Taylor Greer now? Don't you wonder? But I always want to move on. I always want to do something new. And so since you didn't ask, I will tell you that my next book, coming out next September, is a collection of poetry. That is, and I know it's like, a lot of people don't read poetry, but I think I wish we would. I wish we were more of a poetry reading people, because language is such a valuable part of what we have to offer each other and to communicate with each other. And I'm really supposed to wrap it up now. So I'll just tell you my other project is, this always surprises people. I'm working on I'm adapting the Poisonwood Bible as a mini-series for television.
Yeah, that's great. Can't wait to see that.
So I've got lots to do, but don't worry, I will keep writing novels because apparently humans need them. And I thank you for being here in this castle of literature, and I thank you for your love of books, for your support of not just me but all authors, for passing that love on through your families. As long as we read, there is hope for us.
Yes. And thank you.